Other Person Problem is the training series. And today we're going to be doing part 2, the Desire Tangle Loop. So just to kind of do a little itsy bitsy recap of the call yesterday, this was sort of the general frame where I'm laying out the idea and the different parts for the different trainings. So the idea is, what if instead of one version of the future, we actually started thinking about it sort of as a disco ball, where each of us have our own facet, that is our irresistible future, our desire of what we're calling into the world. But at the same time, with all these different versions of the world, how do we actually cohere? And the Four Forces framework is a way to be able to align with life itself. And on that first call, I went over this sort of the general frame. And on this call, we're going to dive into this desire gap area, this first area of like, what are we actually calling into the world? And just some highlights of what I'm going to be covering in this call. Why do we get caught in certain patterns and we kind of struggle to actually get what we want? We're going to look at a common tangle that comes up as just an example because it's such a rich exploration, but wanting to have something tangible to look at how it might work. And then also looking at sort of the nature of desire, the anatomy of desire itself, how it works, and how that can end up also being where we have our love-hate relationship with it. Why power, sex, and money are compelling, but they're also problems and sort of the dark side of desire. And also how we might actually frame ending the battle of good and evil once and for all. I have a proposition there of a way to frame it and in and address it in a different way than what we've been doing in the world. So first, the desire gap. So if we think about it, right, we have this unrealized desire. Now, sometimes the desire, there's big desire and little desire. We might desire that we want an apple and we get up and we go get an apple. But what I'm wanting to call in here is these bigger desires, these bigger feelings and experiences that we want to have. And what I've found is desire has a lot of different features. We're going to look at what are the kinds of things we want, but underneath it, there's also this idea of desire as a state that we want. We want to feel a certain way. So here we have this unrealized desire, and there's a gap. We don't have it, and we want to get it, right? So if we look at this original desire, the idea of often when we have a desire, we have some idea and some envision, something we're visioning, something that we're anticipating. We join a community and we're like, oh man, it's going to be like this. We have some idea of what that's going to be. So if you think about it, whether it's a first relation, we have a relationship and we're in that honeymoon phase, or we start a new job, there's this feeling or thought and idea of what it's going to be. And then what happens? Something happens, right? We have this desire and then something happens. It throws us for a loop. It's not what we expected, or it's confusing. And then we start trying to strategize. Well, all right, well, that happened. So how do I manage that? How do I do that? And then those strategies start to accumulate, and we end up creating beliefs, and some of them in our attempt to try to get what we want, we end up kind of holding it as trauma in our bodies. And then next thing you know, we're in this loop. We're like flip-flopping, doubling down. We're trying to figure out how to get what we want, how to make it work, compromising, bullying. We give up, we bail, we come back, we try it again. And I feel like here's where we are in the world right now, right? We've kind of lost the plot. We're exhausted, we're burnt out, we're a bit soul weary. And it's sort of like if we've kind of lost that original desire often by the time we're in this loop. We can't feel anymore of what was the original reason why we ever wanted to be with that person, for example. So, and one of the things I'm also seeing is that we're escalating, right? This doubling down and this looping that starts to become more urgent as there's more in the world, that is contrary to what we're wanting in a lot of ways. So the next so the idea too here is that often we don't actually even get the realized desire. We're just getting stuck in this loop. So how do we break out of it, right? And also naming here that realized desire is often not what we're even wanting ultimately, or it's a letdown. Not always, but often when we do get it, we're like, okay, we got the promotion or we achieved that success or that goal, we got the new car, and then we're sort of like, okay, then what? We see this a lot with high level leaders. There's lots of achievement, but at some point there's also the thought of, wait, what about meaning? What about my purpose? I'm bored. So one of the things that we want to start with is reconnecting with the original desire and reframing this idea of the gap. So, what are we originally wanting? And one of the exercises and things that I offer with people in the sort of ongoing training community that I'm wanting to invite or will be inviting you guys into, there's a lot of practices that can come into play here about how do you reconnect with that original desire. And once you've reconnected with it, really holding it now as this gap of we don't yet quite know how to get it. When it's a deep desire and when it's a new territory, it becomes a creative act, right? Desire is we're calling something into the world. So if you can hold it in that frame, now you've created a space also where we can prompt life, we're creating a space where life and others can collaborate with us as we're inviting something new in. And this gap becomes not just an invitation, um, it's also a way of framing it so that all of that tangle, all of that information is just support for us to actually get what we want. So if we actually frame it as, oh, everything that we've learned up to this point, everything like we have a relationship, we had this great view of what it was going to be, and then it crashed and burned, and all this stuff happened. All that stuff that happened actually is the gold that allows us to actually understand and learn how to actually get what we want when we're willing to untangle it, when we're willing to dive in and compost and harvest these experiences. And I also want to really name that, we're learning as AI with AI how to prompt this intelligence, right, to be able to get back information. Well, I see life as the ultimate intelligence. And it's been really helpful to start to think of this as how are we prompting life? And desire is one of those key ways where we're saying, hey, life, come collaborate, come play with me. So I want to also name that another part of this process, this is actually a slide from biologist Michael Levin, who talks about the process of transformation and also in biological structures, this idea of cliche of a caterpillar to a butterfly. But one of the things that really fascinated with the way he framed it was there's been scientific studies showing that if you train a caterpillar, when it goes into the cocoon and its brain actually liquefies, it dissolves, and none of that previous brain structure is there, and it turns into a butterfly. The butterfly actually remembers what the caterpillar's experience was, right? It remembers itself. It can actually, whatever it was trained in, it still has that information, which is absolutely fascinating. And the other part that he named that feels appropriate that I want to offer here as a way of working with this untangling is that the butterfly now is a hard-bodied three-dimensional being, and a caterpillar is a two-dimensional soft-bodied being. The memories of the caterpillar actually need to be updated. They need to be restructured and remapped to be useful. So while we want to use the past, we also want to be able to be in a new state of consciousness, a new mindset, a new worldview that allows us to reinterpret and be in the process of evolution of those beliefs and those thoughts as an active process. And we're going to be talking about more of that at the Alive Edges and some of the processes that how we actually navigate unknown territory. That'll be in the fourth video. So also at the core of this, right, we need to understand what we want and why we want it. And so this brings me to the four forces. And just a little quick recap, in my early 20s, I had an environmental store. I was really passionate about creating a better world. I thought a better world was pretty obvious. And then I found out it wasn't, that a lot of the customers had different views. And I realized, there's not just one version of a better world. There's actually right now, 8.2 billion versions of a better world. So I started asking, are there any common desires that we can all agree on? And I actually found that there were just four. And these four are connection, that we want to love and be we want to love and be loved. We want to belong. And expression, as much as we want to belong and fit in and be part of, we also want to be seen and heard as unique. We want freedom. We want our sovereignty. And third, purpose. We want to contribute. We want to be part of something greater. We want order and we want our lives to have meaning. So, and then in addition, I found that the fourth was growth, that we want tomorrow to be better than today. We want to have novelty. We want to have new experiences. We want to evolve. So these four, as I was working with them, I found that they were way more than desires, that they were actually at the heart of the strategies, that we're not taught how to actually get these core desires. So we end up creating all these strategies and often sacrificing one for the other. We're going to look at this more in detail. And then we tend to gather in groups of people that have similar strategies and similar worldviews to us, and that those worldviews I found have the same sort of patterns and same strategies around these four forces. And as I was working with them, I actually found I was having all these ecstatic experiences. I found that there were skills that I was able to reproduce these states of consciousness by applying a set of skills and understanding the mechanisms, the levers, or the, if you think of it like a soundboard, I was able to recreate and experience different things through skills, real practical application of what it means to feel connection, for example. And those states, the states of consciousness and the foundations of reality, we're going to be covering in the next training on Friday. But I found that they were actually the foundation of life itself, and that when we understood how they worked, we were able to then have a completely expanded map of consciousness, and we're actually able to prompt and and have much more impact on reality than we currently realize. So, looking at the desire piece, today we're going to be looking at the sort of desires and strategies aspect of this. So every desire, every fear at its essence can be distilled down to one of these four desires, one of these four forces. So if you pick something that you want, and ask though, why do you want it? Often these will be what comes up. And I find if you kind of dig and look at it more and more, and where it might not be obvious right away, at the heart of it, we want some feeling, or we want something related to these four forces. So let's look at an example, a common one, right? When I was asking what do we all want, money was one of the ones that came up pretty quickly. Everybody wants money. But money itself doesn't have any value. It's paper or metal, it's numbers in a bank account. But what we want is what it can get us. And people are motivated to get money for different reasons. Somebody might want it for freedom, like I don't want to have to think about it. I want to be able to do whatever I want to do. Somebody else might be thinking, well, the only way I'm going to attract a partner or take care of my family is if I have money. We want to be philanthropic and help people, purpose. We want to create in the world. We want to make things and build things, and that would be growth. We want to have power and influence. That's a combination of expression and growth, which we'll talk about in a little bit more in a little bit. So, let's look at another example, a car. Why do certain people buy certain cars? Why would you pick one car over another? Well, at the heart of it is the same thing. Like you do want a reliable car for your family. That could be more in that purpose connection flavor, or you might want a high performance car because you love the feel of adrenaline rush. That would be growth. Or maybe you want it as a status symbol, right? That'd be another expression growth aspect. Or you've got you want a wild retro van because you know what? That's the epitome of your style and who you are, and you want it for expression. You just want it to be a representation of you-ness. So as we start to look at these and understand what are the motivations underneath it, again, we were talking that we end up creating strategies. We end up trying to get what we want, but buying the car isn't necessarily going to get us what we want if we don't understand what it is we're actually trying to get. So a lot of these confusions are what causes suffering in the world. And when we actually understand what they are and how to get it, we actually get to experience what we want, but we also can help We can also help others get what they want when we understand what their motivation is underneath. Why are they actually doing what they're doing? What are they trying to get? And I found that that changes everything. It breaks open not only individual relationships, but looking at cultural patterns. Why are communities and organizations doing what they're doing? What's their emphasis? What's their culture? You start to watch that, and it gives you incredible insight and an incredible ability to have impact in even a much more powerful way. So let's look at one of those a common tangle that we have, desire for connection. So when you connect to a group or a person, what do you do? If you took a minute just to think about that, how would you connect with somebody? I'm like, all right, you're in a new group or you're meeting a new person. What do you do to connect? How do you feel connection? So what I found is, right, if you take a minute to think about that, and I would even say after this call, like start to pay attention. What are you doing when you're wanting to connect with somebody? That gives you a lot of insight. So what I've found is we often think of it as connection is something that we create. We make a connection or we find something in common, or we think of it as something special and rare. So, that person, I felt something really, I really felt a connection with that person, right? It's something special. And other people, you don't. So we start to end up doing this sorting or this idea that we have to do something to make connection happen. And what I found is there's some common strategies that I find that people have. One would be the merger. This is somebody, if you identify as an empath, there's this, they tend to feel everybody, right? So if you're an empath, there's often the feeling of like, ooh, I'm feeling that person, you're me. So that merger often is a way of connecting. That's a strategy. And slightly different, but in important ways, a matcher might be somebody who walks into a room and you're kind of noticing what everybody else is doing and you find common ground and you kind of end up using sameness as a strategy. It's like, how do I fit in? What are the cultural norms? And you end up matching. Then there's the oversharer. The example I have for that one is I was at a Starbucks and this woman walked in with suitcases and there was all the seats were filled and she asked if she could sit with me and I was like, sure, of course. She sat down and for the next 45 minutes, all she did was download at me, just talk, talk, talk. And I was fine. I was killing some time. So it was fascinating and I was just listening. But at the end of it, she said to me, I feel so connected to you. And so we've had those experiences where somebody's just oversharing with us and they feel connected, but we don't necessarily feel connected to them. And then there's the lone wolf, right? That sort of like, I'm just going to be self-contained and then check people out and see whether they're worried, whether I want to connect to them or not. So each of these strategies have a downside to them. So when we are a merger, we can't actually feel what's the other person and what's us. It ends up, and often people feel projected on, and have you ever had that sort of icky feeling where somebody's sort of glomming onto you? There's an energetic to that where it's like, you're me, we're the same. Well, the person's not actually feeling you when they're doing that. And the downside to being a matcher would be that you can't actually, how do you actually feel accepted if you're always matching the other person? There's always this sort of behind, the thought at the back of your mind of like, well, if I actually show up and really show and share who I am I going to be accepted? Because if you're matching, you're not necessarily revealing who you really are. And the sharer is really confusing expression with connection, where you're not experiencing the other person at all. You're experiencing yourself. You're using the other person to experience yourself, but you're not feeling or connecting with the other person. And similarly with the lone wolf, if you've got sort of a wall up, how are you actually able to sense and feel someone? So that protection, saying, I'm going to wait and see, also limits us if we've got a wall up, because it limits how much we can actually sense and experience the other person. So when we untangle connection, before I get to the what it actually is, seeing how these patterns also then map onto community strategies. So there's empathic groups, support groups, and everyone else is like them. And we tend to actually want to create groups that are people like me, but then we end up getting into sameness, and it can end up feeling very mushy and very amorphous, rather than like really being able to feel yourself in the midst of community. And if we look at some of those empathic groups right now, if you kind of look at the left versus the right, there is sort of the we should prioritize the less fortunate, and that can get to a place where it also then really dampens individuality and it really becomes about sameness. Versus, the other flip side of that could be here in the United States, we have MAGA, for example, right? The lone wolf strategy of groups and political parties can say like the sayings of pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You should have to work for what you get, right? That has sort of a lone wolf flavor to it. You don't want to be told what to do. You want freedom. And often that ends up being in opposition to the sameness people. So in the States here, we have the left versus the right that's escalating in a pretty dramatic way. At the heart of it is even this strategy of connection and how we're going about trying to get it and what it means and the tangles of the four forces. And also cultures in the world, Eastern culture focusing on connection and purpose versus and conforming, not getting above others, versus here in the US and some Western cultures to focus on individuality and freedom as a bigger cultural pattern. Even the ideas of communism versus capitalism have that same sort of oppositional quality to them. And so we just keep seeing the pendulum swing. So what I want to name, though, is that one of the ways to untangle this is recognizing that what connection actually is the ability to experience and sense what is already there. When we bring our attention to someone, we experience them if we let ourselves. And in experiencing somebody, we want to also let ourselves be impacted by them. We're in relationship with them. So if we frame connection that way rather than sameness or merging and matching and belonging, now that opens up a different experience of being able to be in relationship with each other. I see love as actually a byproduct of when we bring our attention to someone's heart or their soul or their essence, we feel love. And when we fall out of love, for example, with somebody, I see it as we start to bring our attention to all the things we don't like about that person. So these are really concrete skills that we can develop when we start to untangle it. That opens up a whole bunch of new options for how we can experience each other and how we can create with each other. And the other piece around this connection, this is where the forces relate, is that in order to actually feel connection and sense the other, you need to have a perspective where you are experiencing the other person, you holding your expression, where are you looking from, allows you to not be in that merging and actually allows you to feel others and feel yourself more deeply. So instead of being the lone wolf, there's a stance of being able to be deeply in expression while at the same time open and experiencing the world around you. And that is a new state and a way of patting your head and rubbing your tummy. That's different than how we're currently taught. So again, it's about needing to learn these skills and a willingness to help the other person get what they want. Because, for example, even with love, I might have the skills to be able to feel you, but my desire to be seen and experienced requires you to also have those skills. So for us to get what we deeply desire, we actually need to all learn these foundational skills. And just, in thinking about as we're learning and have this whole other set of experiences that we can have access to and skills that we have access to, if we could actually experience our enemy rather than just understanding their logical argument without losing ourselves or feeling like we have to cave to them, but if we are able to actually sense them while holding ourselves and our own perspective and desire, if we could help the enemy get what they want at the same time that we're bringing our desire to it, what does that break open for possibilities for creation? And in the next training, I mentioned we're going to explore how these skills are related to the foundations of reality itself and how desire is linked to states of consciousness and how we want to feel, and how the four forces are actually also an expanded map of consciousness. So before we wrap up here, I want to talk a bit about the nature of desire itself, sort of the anatomy of desire, and this dark side of desire, including this idea of battling, good versus evil. And the love-hate relationship with desire, there's all these different kinds of quotes where, desire is the core of all evil and we need to shut it down so that we can be in coherence. And we need to get rid of desires. Some spiritual traditions focus on that, and yet we also have this sort of Napoleon Hill version of like your desires are the way you can manifest and the law of attraction. So there's a lot of confusion about it, and it's also understanding when we've got lots of reasons to consider it being out of control when marketing these days is all about pushing the button to try to get you to buy more and consume. So I want to talk about what actually is happening when we feel a desire, when we feel aliveness. And I want to propose that our desire is actually when life force, when aliveness, I put this in the category of growth, when that life force moves through our unique point of consciousness expression, it animates us, it brings us alive, it creates movement. And from that, we create desire. Desire emerges as we feel more alive. So if you've ever noticed when you get charged, it's very easy from that place to be creative, to be able to take action and to move. And it feels good. It feels great, right? You feel more you, you're more alive, you have desire, you feel powerful. We can access our God self. And it's also sexual energy and creativity. And I think I put money here also because money is fuel. It's resources to do something with. And so when we're feeling really great, like it's hard to say to somebody that's in that expression, stop doing that, stop feeling alive. But there's a downside. So when you feel yourself more, often what happens is connection and purpose fade away. They drop away. It becomes harder to feel others and harder to feel coherence. And, this ends up being the kind of core of narcissism. And the more you feel yourself, the less you feel others. You aren't being impacted by others in the same way. And it's very easy. We're seeing a lot of this in the Western culture in particular, and here in the States, of it really becomes about me, me, me. And it's part of the mechanism of this more aliveness, more life force. So I want to propose that this is how I experience or how I think of evil. That evil ultimately is that life force and expression without connection and purpose. So that it's the dropping away of being able to experience others. They just become a means to an end, or the dropping away of relationship purpose. There's only self. And it's different than just being empowered, right? It's more about really only being able to feel what you want. And when we become fearful and our vision of reality sort of shrinks, even if we're very much connection purpose people and we, wanting to, for the greater good, when we're in fear, our focus can really narrow and we can become very self-focused in a way that brings up anger and fear and actions that aren't in that more expanded state. So when we're feeling powerless, when we have that sense of threat, we can often feel powerless, and then we can flip into power over. And I feel like we're seeing that a lot here in the States, on the left, where people that are, would name themselves as hippies and peaceful people are suddenly becoming angry and having a lot of reactions and power over kinds of experiences. So, and here's one of the core problems that with core problem to evil. And I'm not wanting to make light of it, but there's also some simplicity here that I think is helpful to think about. When the downside to being in that sort of self-focus is there's no input from others. There's a way that the only way that you can sort of get more is to turn up the volume because it's just your desire. You're not in relationship. You're not being impacted. And that can easily become an addiction and a way that sort of creates this greed loop or this loop of more without really being impacted, without creativity. It's more without creativity. And just a couple quick, the Hunger Games is one of those sort of classics of the elite and the powerful. And the idea of being bored. I was watching a show and they were doing horrible things to people. And the elite were asked, well, why are you doing it? And they're like, well, we're bored. And there is a truth to that after a while, if you're not in relationship, creativity drops away and it becomes really hard to have any kind of new experience. It's just turning up the volume and kind of doing the same thing over at more intensity is the way that you can satisfy it. And Michael Levin, the biologist I mentioned earlier, he talks about how his research is showing that he's been able to cure some cancers, or starting to do research around curing cancers, but having results when he simply reconnects those cells with the rest of the electrical system of the body, that their sense of self has become smaller. And when he reconnects it to a bigger sense of self, that cancer behavior goes away. And I want to also name that you can't just say to somebody, stop feeling that, like, come over here, sing Kumbaya, give up the power, because it feels good. And there is a downside also to shutting it down. When you shut it down, it's really hard to manifest. It's hard to create money. It's hard to feel yourself even, because you don't have that life force moving through your expression. So you can get burnt out, stagnant, lose track of what you want in the world, and hard to take action. So shutting it down isn't useful either. So I want to propose that the solution here is to learn how to pat our heads and rub our tummies, how to be fully alive and deeply connected at the same time. When we do all four forces at the same time, we have flexibility of consciousness. We have the ability to choose. We have more options open to us. And we're going to be diving more into that on Friday's call, the foundations of reality, and also the alive edges of how can we actually create using these foundations on Monday the 6th.